Senator John Thune, Republican of South Dakota, shown delivering remarks on October 31 in Washington, predicted Republicans would get the votes to pass a tax overhaul. "It takes time to move it across the finish line," he said. "But I think we'll get a bill to the president." Tom Brenner, The New York Times, Washington. Senate Republicans will speed their tax plan toward a possible floor vote this week, and liberal activists will ramp up their efforts to block the bill, in what promises to be a frenzied stretch of an already breakneck attempt to complete a tax overhaul by Christmas. With several Republican senators not yet committed to supporting the $1.5 trillion tax plan, the week is expected to be punctuated by behind-the-scenes arm-twisting and deal-making as Republican leaders work to find enough votes to pass the bill along party lines. At least a half-dozen senators have raised concerns about the bill, including its potential to add to the federal deficit and a provision that would eliminate the Affordable Care Act requirement that most Americans have health insurance or pay a penalty. On Monday, several Republicans from the Senate Finance Committee, including its chairman, Orrin Hatch of Utah, will head to the White House to meet with President Trump for a 12:30 p.m. lunch to talk about taxes. And on Tuesday, Mr. Trump will head to Capitol Hill for a lunch with Republican lawmakers. Ahead of the meetings, Mr. Trump sent out a tweet Monday morning suggesting party leaders were close to making changes to win over some skeptical Senate Republicans, perhaps by increasing the bill's benefits for certain groups, such as small business owners. "The tax cut bill is coming along very well, great support. With just a few changes, some mathematical, the middle class and job producers can get even more in actual dollars and savings, and the pass-through provision becomes simpler and really works well." Donald J. Trump at Real Donald Trump, November 27, 2017. "I think in the end we'll get the votes," Senator John Thune of South Dakota, the Republican conference chairman, told Fox News Sunday this week. "But it's a process, and a legislative process. It takes time to move it across the finish line. But I think we'll get a bill to the president." Recent national polls show the plan fails to garner the support of a majority of Americans. Several polls show a majority actually opposing it. Republicans in Congress have rallied behind the plan, cheered on by business lobbyists, conservative donors, and many Republican economists. Party leaders remain optimistic that it could pass the Senate by the end of the week, 2 weeks after a companion version passed the House and barely a month after the first draft of the legislation was introduced on Capitol Hill. The Republican effort will proceed on two tracks, in the plain view of Senate business and in closed-door negotiations among the party's 52 members in the chamber. Those negotiations are necessary to assuage several senators who have raised public or private concerns with the legislation. The talks could result in substantial changes to the bill before it reaches the Senate floor as soon as midweek, or, more likely, in amendments that the Senate would vote on. The tax bill would sharply reduce the corporate tax rate and reconfigure the system by which multinational companies pay taxes to the United States government. It would also reduce tax rates for individuals while eliminating some deductions, including those for state and local taxes, and allow non-corporate businesses an additional deduction. The package is projected to cost the government nearly $1.5 trillion in tax revenues over a decade, before additional economic growth is factored in. The corporate changes would be permanent, but those for individuals and so-called pass-through businesses would be set to expire at the end of 2025, in order to comply with Senate budget rules. The House bill, however, makes the individual cuts permanent, and that is one of many differences with the Senate legislation that will ultimately need to be resolved before the bill is sent to the president. Several Senate Republicans loom as potential roadblocks to the tax bill, including Senators Bob Corker of Tennessee, Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, right, and Jeff Flake of Arizona. Pablo Martinez Montes of Associated Press. Any bill that passes the Senate is likely to differ in significant ways from the House-passed version, and Republican leaders in both chambers have said repeatedly that such differences will be worked out in a formal conference committee. But a White House official said this weekend that the administration's current strategy is to skip that step, incorporating whatever changes need to be made to satisfy House Republicans while the bill is still pending in the Senate, so that the House could simply approve the Senate version and send the bill directly to Mr. Trump for his signature. Much of the action this week will be dictated by obscure Senate budget rules, which is what will allow Republicans to move the bill without any Democratic votes. The bill has already passed the Senate Finance Committee. It next goes to the Budget Committee, which will meet Tuesday to join the tax provisions to a bill that will allow energy exploration in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, a move that has long been a priority for Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, a Republican widely seen as a key vote on the tax bill. Ms. Murkowski gave supporters of the tax bill optimism last week when she wrote that she was amenable to the bill's inclusion of a provision that would repeal the so-called individual mandate required by the Affordable Care Act. Other Republicans still loom as potential roadblocks for the bill, including Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, who has criticized its treatment of small businesses that are organized as pass-through companies, and Bob Corker of Tennessee and Jeff Flake of Arizona. Each has warned about the tax bill's potential to bloat the national debt. Satisfying any one holdout could inflame others. For example, if Mr. Johnson succeeds in securing more generous tax cuts for pass-through businesses, the bill's fiscal cost will likely rise, potentially upsetting Mr. Corker and other Republicans who have raised deficit concerns. Both Mr. Johnson and Mr. Corker sit on the Budget Committee, and together they could slow or stop the bill's progress there. If they chose not to, the bill would advance to the Senate floor, where senators would begin 20 hours of debate and amendments, leading up to a final vote. Liberal activists are hoping to spark a public backlash to defeat it. The activist group Indivisible has planned a day of action against the bill on Monday, while the group Organizing for Action has one planned for Tuesday. The group Not One Penny, which advocates against tax cuts for the rich, has nearly 3 dozen protests planned around the nation within the next week. The Senate's tax vote this week, and the public's reaction to it, will shape our economy and politics for a generation, said Ben Wickler, the Washington director of the activist group Move On, which is organizing what it calls tax scam caroling across the country from Wednesday through Saturday. Anyone who doesn't want a country run by and for the people at the very top should be in the streets. Similar protests helped maintain a tide of public opposition to the Republican plan to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act earlier this year, which eventually failed in the Senate. Republican leaders appear confident that this round will be different, in part because their members are united by the need for a legislative victory. "We need to get this accomplishment," Mr. Thune said on Sunday. "This is a goal that we've had for a long time. The tax code in this country needs to be changed if we're going to be competitive in the global marketplace." Peter Baker contributed reporting.